People in fantasy novels get hurt sometimes. Healing magic is always a tricky thing to write. Too powerful and accessible, and it feels like no one's ever in peril. Too rare, and you can never let your hero take too bad a knocking unless they're out of the action for weeks. In this month's lecture, we're going to explore how healing magic works in Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. Class is in session. This will spoil nearly every book in the Cosmere. Healing might be the most ubiquitous magic across the Cosmere. Nearly every planet has some example of it. It's one of the simplest of tricks. Give someone enough power and their health will usually generally improve. In fact, it happens so much there's almost no explanation for it. You're hurt, you just get better, like you drank a health potion, or took a long rest, or the white mage cast Cure on you. Your HP is simply full. But the truth is, healing in the Cosmere is complicated and specific. As a disclaimer, I want to make it perfectly clear that this is a discussion of arcana and biology. I am not offering medical advice. Do not try to treat yourself at home with any of the information I am providing. That aside, I will try to highlight what we do know about Cosmere healing and how it works. We're going to start by listing several examples of arcane healing in the Cosmere to all get on the same page. Let's begin with some of the most obvious. Gold Furukmi, perhaps the most direct example. An invested ability purely to heal, and notably to do the opposite. Wayne and Miles de Gouder are the two biggest examples and the ones we learn the most from. There's honestly a great deal we can determine just from this first example. For one, Gold Furukmi is magical, as in it's not just normal healing juiced up. Invested healing does things which aren't simply normal healing at a faster speed. It can regrow limbs, whereas even if normal biological healing were supercharged, it would just seal over the wound. It can repair nerve damage, it can magic toxins out of the body, it can repair the spiritual damage done by hemalurgy and shard blades. But here's the thing, Furukmi stores up natural abilities. You can't use it to store things like the power to fly or memories of something you've never experienced. This suggests that magical healing in the Cosmere is, well, mundane. That everyone does it, that every single person, and maybe even every animal and plant, has within them not just the normal biological healing potential, but a tiny scrap of the drive to restore your body to its natural state. Not very much, not enough that a person in the Cosmere would be considered a miraculous or even remarkable healer by Earth medical standards, but it's just that everyone has at least a tiny bit of that magic in their blood. Another interesting thing to note is what happens when Wayne is storing health. He immediately seems to start to suffer. It almost seems like he's unhealing? Like his body's taking damage. I don't think he's storing his way into negative health, however, since I don't believe that Furukmi can go into negative numbers. You can't make yourself weigh less than 0. I think it's just that healing is something the human body has to do all the time. The body is a factory, constantly at work, with millions of tiny little moving parts constantly getting damaged. The air we breathe is filled with irritants our body deals with. Germs enter our system and are quickly dealt with. We mostly don't notice, because how much a person heals typically keeps up with that. But with Wayne, we're seeing what happens when the healing isn't fast enough. Instead of a minor irritant being dealt with, it makes your nose drip. Instead of your muscles healing as you use them under normal circumstances, just climbing into a train car makes your muscles ache. I'm no doctor, so perhaps someone with greater medical expertise can correct me, but that's the impression I get. There's more we can say about Wayne's healing while actually sick with a viral infection, but put them in an cadmium bubble. I'm going to hold off on explaining that until we have another data point down the line. One final note on ferrochemical healing. Your homework this week will be to write in the comments section down below what exactly you think was happening with Miles when he was executed. How did he keep healing? A hidden metal mind inside his body? Something else? I have my own theory, but I'd like to hear yours. Sticking with Scadrial, I'd be remiss not to mention pewter allomancy. It's not as fantastical as Gold Furukmi, but pewter does enhance many of a body's natural abilities, and healing is included. It won't let you regrow a lost arm or seal up wounds in seconds, but apart from keeping you alive, despite wounds which would kill a normal person, it does increase healing by a significant margin. Recovering from a wound which should take months to heal might not happen in seconds, but it will happen within weeks of constant burning. Pewter healing seems impossible, yet not miraculous. It would heal a wound that should kill any normal person, yet we see it just do a normal healing faster and stronger. We never see it actually regrow a limb or anything else that normal healing simply can't do. We also see a Kolos blood thug who seems to heal even faster than just pewter would explain, though this is a side character in off-screen, so perhaps the initial wound just wasn't as bad as it originally seemed. There isn't really any other Scadrian healing. Hemalurgy can, let's say, adapt a body, and I will circle back to how I think that is related, but it's not actually healing. And obviously, it can take ferrochemical gold or allomantic pewter, but that's just a roundabout way of taking what we've already discussed. On to the other major planet in the Cosmere, Roshar. Healing is thick on the ground here. Just holding Stormlight, Lifelight, Voidlight, and presumably all the hybrid lights is enough to grant healing that makes ferrochemical gold look sluggish. Very notably, it doesn't heal Kaladin's slave brands until he has moved past his guilt and stopped feeling like he deserves them. That, along with the Lopin being able to regrow his arm, although it had been years, are critical factors in healing, which we will get into in a later section after I've reviewed the examples. There's actually not a lot of nuance to discuss here beyond that. There are a number of ways a person can gain access to light. Nahel bond is the most common, or being a fused or a regal, though I'm not sure if we specifically see any examples of regals actually healing. We know void light powers their abilities, but we generally see them get trivial injuries or be outright slain. But this isn't the only way Stormlight can affect the living beings of Roshar. Even normal humans are curiously resistant to diseases. Some travelers bring the common cold, and it's considered a plague, because by and large, humans simply don't get casually sick because of the prevalence of Stormlight granting them just enough healing to fight off disease. We also know that crops can be grown in Stormlight as a replacement for sunlight, and that the listeners know of a way to use Lifespan, Stormlight, and Rhythms to make crops grow unusually fast. Not to mention, at least some of the indigenous life on Roshar has developed gem hearts to draw on Stormlight, both as a way to bond with Mandras and grow to unusual size, but also to fuel maturation into larger forms sometimes. Even the singers are able to use the power of light to grow into a whole new form. All of which ties into my next topic, the surge of progression. Progression has two main focuses. One of them is regrowth, which we've seen is essentially the same thing from elsewhere in the Cosmere, which makes me wonder, the way that light weaving seems to be the formal term for illusions in the whole dwarf galaxy, will regrowth become the byword for magical healing? Let me know what you think in the comments. The other is growth, making plants grow not just very rapidly, but even under specific directions, like how Lift was able to control a tree enough to stop it from pulling its leaves back as she climbed it, and grew a vine very, very specifically to make it unlatch a window. What this all suggests to me is that the two are actually related, that healing someone and causing and controlling biological growth are related powers. Look at the magnified ones with their single surge of progression, who not only heal, but can grow their carapace, not simply to its default form, but into whatever shapes they desire. The two are very much distinct, and a being can have one power without the other, but they do remain related, which I find interesting. 3 more quick topics from Roshar I want to discuss before we move on. One is Shallan healing a hangover. Should that even work? A hangover isn't really damage that's been done to you, or toxin still in your body. I could be wrong on the medicine here, but I believe a hangover is largely due to dehydration. Even if Stormlight could heal the symptoms, wouldn't the depleted body just go back to the state of agony rather quickly? If a person is dehydrated, does healing then restore water to the system? I suppose it must. One thing I like about the Cosmere is how Brandon has said it's possible to hack systems, that the results in something inefficient a lot of the time. So my tentative conclusion is that healing will restore water to a dehydrated body, but that using something like ferrochemical bendalloy will always be a more effective option. Another is surge binders who are actively using the surge of progression rather than just healing themselves. We see a young Truth Watcher new to her powers who is unable to heal Adelin's leg, even with plentiful Stormlight. In fact, Adelin has been unconscious this entire time since his leg was crushed and didn't even know it's gone by the time the healing falls. So it's not even his mental state. For some reason, if you're new to regrowth, there are some wounds you simply cannot heal, it seems. Then there's Rosharan. When he fights the Thunderclast in Thaylen City, it seems he heals himself better and more efficiently than other Radiants can, despite being relatively new to his own powers, only a few weeks prior having healed someone for the first time, seeming unaware that he could. Though he has had rather a lot of experience since, helping the injured in Thaylen City following the Everstorm. He also manages to cure himself of poor eyesight, which, again, were hampered by my personal understanding of the biology of poor eyesight. But as someone who has needed glasses since as far back as I can recall, I had the impression that it was a chronic condition. I'm aware that it gets worse as people get older, so perhaps people like me have the spiritual ideal of good eyesight, but in practice, our eyes rapidly degrade, and Rosharan is just healing often enough that he keeps his vision in perfect form. And now, lift but not least. For all that she's a unique example in many ways, and she is described as an unusually strong healer, which may be explained by her use of Lifelight, I only want to talk about one thing regarding her, the occupation of Eurytheru. While there, she was one of the only Surge Binders awake. The sibling themselves said it was because she was made to work on a different light. Yet, despite this, she can't make abrasion work, and yet she does seem to be able to heal. Is it that progression is cultivation's truest surge, and can fight through the suppression? I wonder if instead, without realizing it, she's just able to invest anyone she wishes with her Lifelight, which heals on its own. The last is simply a curiously specific example I wanted to bring up. We see Ba Ado Mishram in a vision healing critically injured singers. When she sees a human, even though she sings to ease his passing, she states that she both does not want to heal him and couldn't even if she did. I wonder what the underlying cause of all that is. Given her ultimate actions, I wonder if from the start she's always had an innate connection to singers, and that's why she's able to gift healing to them, but not humans. One last note I want to bring up, though I'll come back to it later. The actions of healing singers seems to be she breathes out on them, and then they're surrounded by a cloud of darkness. If that darkness is meant to represent void light, then it seems largely in keeping with how Lift would breathe Lifelight onto people when she uses Regrowth. However, then there's one final element. Upon doing so, Ba Ado Mishram says, heal. Live. I want you to keep that in mind as we shift our focus to Nalthis. The heightenings grant a few interesting benefits. One is agelessness, which we know from Brandon isn't the same thing as health. In a sense, it's kind of the opposite. That said, we do know the heightenings grant, how to phrase it, robust health? Diseases and poisons struggle to affect you the more breath you have, though notably you aren't immune. Yet, as we've pointed out, curing someone from disease is something that's actually difficult for traditional healing to do. Yet Vivenna is cured of her illness the moment she takes a few hundred breaths. Not very much, all things considered. And while we never see its particular lack, we also never see any direct examples of someone with a lot of breath overtly healing quickly. Lightsong takes one bag leg wound shortly before the climax of the book, but we don't really get an update on whether it heals or not. Blushweaver dies of a very dramatic injury, suggesting her healing factor, if it exists, is far less than ferrochemical gold or holding Stormlight, but that doesn't preclude her having one. But of course, let's talk about the big dramatic healing of Nalthis, a return sacrificing themselves to heal with their divine breath. It says a lot that I say this following a discussion of Roshar, but this might be the most dramatic healing in the Cosmere, as befits the fact that it costs a god per healing. Now, some of the more dramatic retellings, such as a single returned healing an entire village, we know are fabrication. That said, just the examples we do know of are quite powerful. Comseer healed her own daughter from the disease which took her own life. And as we've already seen, a lot of healings, while it can prevent you from getting a disease in the first place, has trouble curing you once you're infected. So that on its own is impressive. But when Lightsong heals the God King, it doesn't just restore a loss this man suffered since birth and has definitely internalized. It also grants him the capacity to actually speak, which is something getting a tongue for the first time in their lives would not be able to do. Here's where I want to tie it back to Ba Ado Mishram. We know a divine breath, a tiny splinter of a shard of an analcium, can grant healing, which would be considered miraculous even by the high standards of the Cosmere. We know Ba Ado Mishram is, herself, quite a powerful splinter of a different shard. And we know when she heals the singers, she commands them, heal, live. I wonder if she really is simply using the equivalent of regrowth, or is it more like a return? Is she breaking off chunks of her own power and using them to command the singers via their connection to be restored? Now, obviously, she doesn't die by giving away this power, and she can do it multiple times. For the latter, that would suggest she's simply stronger than returned, and presumably has some means, potentially her connection to Odium, to replenish her reserves, or she would quickly reach the limit of how many she can heal. For the first, the mechanism of a return dying isn't quite as simple as they must die to heal someone. For one, they did die already. The divine breath is keeping them around at a cost. It wouldn't matter if they didn't heal. They could just put their divine breath into a rock and they'd still die again. Presumably, if a living person somehow had a divine breath and gave it away to heal someone, it wouldn't cost them their life. Ba'ado Mishram is an odd middle case, since she's neither a dead person nor a living one. She is made of power, and as we've seen in Sunlit Man, giving away or burning away that power does terminate a spren. So we circle back to she must simply have more power than a returned, and either a way for that to replenish, or every single singer she heals is a permanent reduction in her power, a true sacrifice. As dramatic as that second would be, I presume it's the first. We know fused can replenish their powers, as can regals. We know every other unmade can do what they do, granting prophecy, driving to bloodlust, enlightening spren, and none of them seem to be in danger of dwindling to nothing. So presumably, maybe just by breathing in more void light, they can all replenish the power they expend using their abilities. All right, we're almost at the end of my examples, where I can finally start my analysis. Start. Aeon Ayin on Sel, both a powerful magic and a side character. Aw, poor crazy Ayin. Anyway, on to the Aeon. Ayin is said to mean wisdom, but the effect seems to be healing. When simply drawn, it seems to act like any other kind of regrowth, like Stormlight or Ferrochemical Gold, just generically healing the person. Sadly, on our one clearest examples, didn't actually work. Since the patient was too wounded, the practitioner was not at peak might, and the application was unfocused, doing as much to heal liver spots as the stab wound through the abdomen. We do see another healing in a flashback, one almost impossibly complex, one which perfectly heals a badly mangled leg, which had already been seen by a number of more mundane doctors, infection allowed to set in. Another healing, which doesn't get much focus, comes at the end of the book, where Galadon, despite being very far from Elantris, is able to draw Ayin well enough to heal Raoden's hands. Raoden may himself have extra healing powers as an Elantrian, though we know they can die of heart conditions even in Elantris. Though if he does, it was likely weakened by the distance to the city. But there's one more use I want to draw attention to. Raoden uses Ayin to grow Sereni's hair, and from the description, it's clearly not heal your hair to the length you feel it should be, like Nomad does in Sunlit Man. Raoden specifies that he's using the modifiers to make the hair grow as it normally would, just at a much accelerated rate and for a specific amount of time. He grew her hair exactly as long as he intended to, not just until it's as it used to be. The reason I find this interesting is because it draws another parallel between healing and just rapid biological growth. The two are not at all the same, but they are very much related. And lastly, just kind of catch-all examples. These are people who heal a lot and very fast and powerfully, but we don't really know enough to go into. Dragons, even in bipedal form, even when their powers are suppressed. Anyone who has held the Dawn Shard of Exist, though I wonder if that's a different mechanism. Elantrians, at least at the moment the city was fixed and the Sheod completed. So we're not sure if Elantrians always heal, or if the process of the Sheod is one big free healing, like getting a divine breath. But we do get to see someone pull a sword out of himself as he heals and use it to threaten someone, which is awesome. If you can think of any examples I've missed, please feel free to add them in the comments below. Okay, now that I'm on with the examples of healing, let's give more examples. This time of things which are not healing. The way shadows can contrast and heighten light, seeing things which are expressly not healing, can help us narrow down what healing actually is. Let's start with shades, or rather the withering a shade can induce. We see silver used on the planet to heal the withering, but it isn't actually healing. Why? Withering isn't a normal, natural wound. Silver isn't restoring a person's health in general. Silver is just the cure to a very specific condition. It wouldn't work on a cut or a disease. It is healing a person in a sense, but the topic of this video is the specific mechanism of what I think will eventually universally be labeled regrowth. Silver is counteracting one arcane affliction, but it's not an example of regrowth. That said, Brandon has confirmed that enough regrowth-style healing will be enough to fight off the affliction of shade weathering, even though burning elementic aluminum would be a better way. We see Yasna cure Shallan's poisoning by soul casting her blood. This, while an antidote, is again not the healing we're discussing today. It might be able to mimic some of the end effects, but through a different process. Shapeshifting is also distinct in its many forms, though this can mimic healing a lot more than many of my other examples. Whether we're talking a Kandra, a Saya Aimian, or Returned, they all have options to mitigate pain and injury through direct control of their biology. I actually think that this one might potentially be the closest, since in some cases I think it might be related to normal biological growth, but I still don't think it's the same thing. My confidence here is the least. I would not be surprised if Brandon someday confirms that a Kandra shapeshifting from a wounded leg to a healthy leg is actually a closely related mechanic to regrowth. Another thing which might look like healing is giving water to a person who has overmastered or has been using Midnight Essence too much. Their body will look withered, even desiccated, and drinking water will restore them faster than biologically possible. They can even drink unlikely amounts. Fort drinks almost a barrel of water while taming the Midnight Essence, which is not possible, yet somehow it happens. Whatever is happening here certainly seems arcane, but again, it's more dealing with one specific invested malady than regular healing. And the last thing which isn't healing is flesh forgery, literally magic for the express purpose of healing. Here's where we have to get particular. Yes, unlike the other examples I provided, it is magic, and it does heal. So how do I justify saying it isn't magical healing? Well, remember, we're discussing one specific mechanic, what I think we'll all call regrowth soon, which isn't just any healing that's magic, but this one specific method shared by all the examples I listed before. By that metric, flesh forgery is different. There's no default setting. There's no option to just pour your power into a person and let it heal as it will. Flesh forgery is more like surgery. You have to know exactly what it is you plan to do, and then the seal does that no matter what. It's a bit like how you can turn clay into gold through either a soul stamp or soul casting, but they're two wildly different arcani. So what about Ayin? Why is that considered regrowth, but flesh forgery isn't? I already pointed out, Ayin can absolutely be used very specifically with enough modifiers, even to do things which don't really fit into regrowth. The difference there is, Ayin is still regrowth at its core. When you draw just Ayin with no modifiers, no specific instructions, it simply pours healing power into a body and lets it do whatever it's going to do. Yes, with modifiers, you can absolutely focus it and make it do very particular tricks, just like the Surge of Progression can make a vine grow in a specific way to unlatch a window, but the fundamental use remains default, automatic healing. And that's it, finally, the end of the examples. Now I can at last get to the part where I tell you what healing is, that is regrowth. Brandon has given us a pretty clear and specific definition, and like any definition in science, it isn't absolute. This is the default, simplest application of regrowth. I realize that there are exceptions, but this is what happens without extra steps being taken. As you all remember from Intro to Realmatics, most beings exist in all three realms. A human's body, the thing we're talking about healing, is in the physical realm, the realm of matter and energy and what we can normally sense and touch. In the cognitive realm, there is a person's cognitive aspect, made up of their thoughts, what they think about themselves, and what others think of them. And lastly, we have a person's spirit web in the spiritual realm, which is tied to Platonic ideals and represents how a person is meant to be. This is all very much simplified for the purposes of this explanation. The basic use of growth is to take a body's spiritual ideal, how they should be, and change their physical body to match. In between, the cognitive aspect can block some of these changes. That's it. It's as simple as that. Physical matches spiritual, blocked by cognitive. Here's one misunderstanding I see crop up frequently. Cognitive can only block healing. It can't direct it. You don't heal into whatever you think you should be. You can't just wish for claws or get bonked on the head and think you have lizard skin and then heal into that. If you have a scar or injury, that you've accepted as part of your own body, regrowth will try to heal it, but your mind will stop that and you'll stay in your current form. For those of you hoping to go to Nexus, I believe Wave 1 of potential ticket sales goes live the day after this video first airs. May fortune favor you. If you make it to Nexus, and if I do as well, come find me and say hi. I'll be either in my professorial garb, or I will be dressed up as a Kolos. Class dismissed.